I'd like to thank the folks at Ceramics Monthly for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. As many of you know, Ceramics Monthly has been the widest circulated publication dedicated to sharing ideas, discoveries, and the best work in the ceramic arts field since 1953. Since my time as a student over 25 years ago up until today, they've been my go-to source for inspiration. I know it's going to be a good day when the newest edition of the magazine shows up in my mailbox. For a limited time, Ceramics Monthly is offering Red Clay Rambler listeners 15% off any new CM subscriptions. Now through January 31st, 2024, visit ceramicartsnetwork.org/Rambler and enter the promo code for the subscription of your choice that's listed on that page. Again, the website for that is ceramicartsnetwork.org/Rambler. Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 494 of the podcast, and also welcome back to 2024. This is our first episode of the new year, and I'm excited to be talking to Matt Katz. Along with his wife Rose, he's one of the co-founders of the Ceramic Materials Workshop. Together, they offer online classes in ceramic chemistry, which are utilized by artists and students from around the world. In this interview, we talk about his path from maker to researcher, how he makes chemistry exciting for his students, and the podcast For Flux's Sake, which Matt is a co-host on. I also happen to be the producer for that podcast and have had a great time over the years making that with Matt and Rose and Kathy King. If you'd like more information, you can visit ceramicmaterialsworkshop.com, or you can check out the website for the podcast, which is brickyardnetwork.org/For Flux's Sake. As we head into this new year, we're having a comment drive. This is one of the easiest ways you can support this show, and the best part is that it is totally free. All you got to do is take a minute and leave a review and a rating for the show on your favorite podcast app. Thanks everybody for listening in the last year, and I look forward to having lots of new episodes for you in this upcoming year. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. You are really known for being a glaze expert and being a materials scientist or a materials wizard. But you started as just someone who loved clay. And as I've listened to For Flux's Sake and as we've worked on it, I realized that a lot of people just don't really know, like, how did you get from artist to researcher? Like, what was that path?
Yeah, it's really funny. And at first I should say, I'm not a wizard. I just really like sparkly robes. That's just where I come from. I don't have any magic powers. But no, you're right. I started as a ceramicist. Like, I started in high school. I grew up in rural Maine, and I went to a very small school. And I was always an art and theater nerd. Like, that was my jam. I started doing drawing classes every week when I was, third grade. Fourth grade, really early. And we had a weird school system where you'd get every Wednesday afternoon off, and parents are like, oh my God, what are we going to do? We got no school every Wednesday afternoon. And so this one teacher would do art class. So I did drawing and painting for years. And then by the time I got to high school, we had a teacher start at the school my sophomore year, and she brought a wheel and a kiln. And I was like, well, this is interesting. And that was it. I was done. And that was it. I gave up. But I mean, I would still draw and paint. I did a lot more photography than anything, but I was just like, this is it. I knew that at that moment. Every free time, every free period, I was just down there trying to figure out the wheel. I went through the next 2 years. I did I did an APR class. I did ceramics. Like it was just everything. And then I happened to find, oddly enough, a small, very small community of ceramic nerds in my hometown. That I sort of hang out in the local punk rock scene, and inside, the 90s were a weird time, but inside the local punk rock scene, there were a couple of ceramics people, and they had told me about Alfred. One of them was a friend of mine to this day, Rob Sutherland, and he was a year ahead of me, and he went to a different high school, but he told me about this place called Alfred, or Alfred University, and how he was going to go there to do ceramics. And I'm like, you can do that? That's amazing. And so I sort of ended up going, I can do that. Like I had spent so many years sort of already at that point chasing this, that I'm like, I need to know more. But I was making pots. That's what I did. All the time, just starting the way everybody starts, making horrible, ugly pots. I still have our first pot. It's out in the workshop. But yeah, no, I just loved it, and it was that obsession that never stopped.
Do you think that knowing something well changed your personality? Because one of the things I noticed with undergrad students, and I noticed this in my own experience, is that I got confidence by knowing about something. The something happened to be ceramics, but knowledge gave me confidence. Do you feel the same with you?
I just think in general, I mean, it sounds like a cliche or like something from an 80s cartoon, but like knowledge is power. Like I was definitely an art and theater nerd, but I was in love with school. I was one of those weirdos. Like I really like school. Like I loved history class. I loved English class. The one class I always say that I didn't love was chemistry. I was a pretty good student, but the one class I ever got a C in was chemistry, and I got a D on my final exam. And I loved my chemistry teacher. My chemistry teacher I still talk to, and we think it's hilarious that like I'm essentially a professional chemist. But I love like learning, and whether it's ceramics, whether it's anything else, like I just never stop. I just would rather spend my time learning and getting better, because you can always be better. Like that's something I'm always striving for.
You have small kids, and so now you're getting to parent them into their own exploration of stuff. When you see them have a passion, because you have such a singular focus, you and Rose both, like I think your profession is as specific as anyone I've met.
It's weird.
So how in your parenting, how do you sort of negotiate their passions for things? I mean, I know they're not that old, but I'm sure they're showing a preference for something.
Our younger one is young enough that it's still sort of just like whatever catches his whimsy, and he sort of chases after that. Although he's the one of the two that is interested in ceramics. Like he wants to go out and make stuff in the studio. The older one does not care. It's just like, you guys are boring and weird. But our older one, who's now 12, it is definitely of giving them the freedom to pursue that, like is a big deal for us. We don't want to ride them to the point where they get exhausted by it. We don't want to try to like fake obsession with them, but if they are interested in something, we will sort of take it and engage with it. Like our older son is definitely interested in technology and in things like that, and we just got a 3D printer for the workshop to just make some small parts and whatnot. And my son is just like, oh, okay, I need this and I need this. And literally, and I'm like, okay, well, so he and I have been doing a 3D design class. And we've been doing it together, and we were doing online videos and watching it. And he just made his own nameplate for his door. Like he designed it and he modeled it and he printed it. And he's so proud of it. He's like, okay, now I want to learn how to do this. And I went out there, and I'm like, okay, we'll just, let you go and follow what you want. And that's the freedom that also my parents gave me. I was really lucky growing up that my parents had sort of said, you can do whatever you want. We're not going to place any restrictions on it. And it came from a weird place, because my father, some of you have heard on our podcast, he's a doctor. And it was kind of weird for a doctor to go, no, you can do what you want. But their whole rule was that you have to be sensible about it. Like, you have to know how to work within the system. And so, like, they made me do things that, my friends thought were weird, but like, they said, okay, you want to work in ceramics, go get a job in ceramics. Like, your summer job has to be in ceramics. So one year I worked in a gallery, one year I worked in a pottery, just like doing normal, like low level, like nobody stuff. But they're like, you have to see what the industry is if you want to pursue this. And I learned a lot of things from them from doing that. Like, was it practical? You can argue it, but it definitely gave me perspective, and the perspective was important. And that's what we try to show our kids, is engagement and perspective.
So when you went to Alfred at that point, or we should describe that Alfred also has ceramic science that's separate from the art school. So how did you get to be sort of infatuated with the science of it? Because hundreds of people go through the art school and don't they take glaze chem, but that, you know what I mean? They're
Right.
not up there talking to Bill Carty about stuff.
Some of them do, and I should go back and say, officially, for the folks who don't know, I'm sure the university's marketing department would love to say it's the New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University. And it's a really weird school, because people in the art community know it as like this like amazing institution of the study of ceramic art, and it is. It is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, university for the study of ceramics in the world. And it's amazing, but the art school is only half. So the other half is the School of Ceramic Engineering. And that is just pure science, just nothing but science. And this is the part the marketing department won't like, is like, they love to say in the advertising, like, oh, there's all this cross collaboration and inspiration. And maybe things have changed since I was there, but back then there really wasn't. What there was two professors. There was Bill Carty, who you mentioned, and John Gill. And John and Bill are, to this day, best friends. They eat lunch multiple times a week. And John is an art professor and Bill is an engineering professor, and they just thought each other are the coolest. And Bill does teach a class in sort of ceramic engineering for artists, so you can go and learn. And I started doing that kind of thing. But it's very weird, because one of the classic things you'll hear people in the art say is, oh, well, ceramic engineering doesn't apply to art. And they're not wrong, but it's mostly that nobody bothered to take the concepts of ceramic engineering and look at what artists did. And that's the rabbit hole that I fell into, because there was an opportunity for exploration. And going through my educational process, I sort of ended up chasing that, because that lack of collaboration needed more attention. Because it was amazing, the conversations that I'd sit in with Bill and John at lunch, and them talking about these cool concepts. But it's sort of like, okay, yes, and then like, okay, let's do this thing and let's figure this out. And so, yeah, I ended up in a place where I was able to do it. But for years it had started. So I'd gone to Alfred, and I was a ceramic student. I was a normal ceramic student. For years I was going in the pottery direction, and I sort of thought I was going to do that. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was in my early 20s and sort of figuring that out. And then eventually I sort of to move around and sort of got more interested in everything. So I started really going, okay, I like the pots. Oh, here's decals. Oh, here's terracage. Here's slips. Here's slip casting. Like, oh, this is really cool. There are all these other facets that, when I sort of thought I was going to be a potter, I was just like, well, I'm going to be a potter. I'm going to figure out the wheel, and I'm going to figure out, cone 10 salt firing, and I'm going to do the wood firings and do all that. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, wait, there's a lot here. Like, there's a lot to know about ceramics. And then I just sort of started chasing all of the things, and just sort of going, I like one of my worst behaviors is that I am severely addicted to process. I kind of don't care about the final object for what I do. And that sort of got triggered when I was in school of like, really, I just want to chase the process. Like, yeah, the pot's fine at the end of the day, but like, yeah, that's great. But like, I want to know how to get that color and that texture, and why does that do that, and why does this shiver, and why does that slip come out this color, and all that kind of thing. And I just got addicted to the questions, right? The questions were more than anything. After I finished my undergraduate degree, I was asked by Bill Carty that he was interested in starting a ceramic science for artists program. And I was finishing up my BFA and, figuring out where I was going to go in life. And I had worked for Bill in the summers doing some introductory research. So we had established a good relationship and had made it clear, like, I was interested in these things. So as I'm finishing up my undergraduate degree, Bill asked me if I would be the test subject for a new master's program, which was ceramic engineering for artists. He really thought that there was an avenue, and he really liked how artists considered problem solving. He liked the challenges that they had that were not the traditional ceramic engineering problems. And people like to make fun of ceramic engineering dinnerware. Oh, it's cold, or everything's a toilet. But like, they're dealing with real problems. But there is this whole other world of problems and opportunities that just weren't being studied because they didn't fall under the parameters of sort of normal manufacturing production. So he asked me to be his test subject. So I agreed to do it, and I stuck around Alfred for several years after I had graduated to do this program. Long story short, the program in and of itself fell apart because of the bureaucratic nightmare that is academia. I will say, for the academics in the room, the ceramic engineering faculty, not all of them, but some of them, had a real issue with allowing people that had not been through their process of education to come into their system. And boy, I will say that you need to be open to alternative backgrounds, and to assume everyone to jump through your parameters of expected education is going to limit radically the potential inspiration of students coming. And that's literally what happened to me. Like, literally, there was one person who held up the stoplight at the engineering department. They said, "No, we do not respect your background, and we will not let you proceed," which is unbelievably naive. Just one of the worst decisions. Someone in academia whose job is to encourage education, knowledge, and exposure to make that decision. Luckily, Bill Carty didn't have that, and he had said, "Well, okay, this program's not going to go forward. But what I will do is I have a research group, and come work at my research group, and you can do research." And basically, it was a situation where, as long as I did the work for the research group, I was sort of allowed to explore whatever I wanted with Carty. And I was just sort of chasing different things. My biggest project at that time was this was sort of the early 2000s, and we just gone through the original disappearance of Gersley borate. And nobody knew how Gersley borate actually worked. It was really disappointing because it was this huge panic attack in glaze chemistry. We're like, "Oh my gosh, this material's gone away." And, you'd read all these articles. "Oh yeah, 5 Gersley borate substitutes, and here's how you get rid of Gersley borate." And all the information contradicted all the other information. And it made me crazy because I'm like, these are the experts. How is there not some defined system? So I literally went and worked on a research project for several years to define how Gersley borate, or not how Gersley borate, but how boron chemically works, and came up with probably what will end up being the most important piece of chemistry research that I ever do. And I finished it when I was 24. But it is a major contributing factor to everything that I do to this day. So I worked with Carty for a number of years, and it was sort of this thing of, I was doing the thing. I was still interested in art. Like, I was still like, I hadn't sort of gotten over the art perspective, and I'd lived in Alfred for a long time. I met Rose during that time, and Rose had finished up her degree, and she was looking to go somewhere. And, I was doing great things with Cardi, but it was still sort of like, just doing work and trying to figure out as a young person what to do. And in ceramics, that I wanted to teach, I wanted to grow as an artist. And so, yeah, I decided to go to grad school and to get out of Alfred. So, yeah, I ended up at CU Boulder, working under Kim Dickey and Jeannie Quinn and Scott Chamberlain.
I actually just interviewed Kim yesterday.
Oh, really? Oh, she's my favorite.
She said the same about you, and she said, "I'm so proud of what they've done and how you guys have gotten Ceramic Materials Workshop up and running." But what I want to think about is like getting an MFA in art. It like pushes you in an art direction, and so you probably could have made a life as a maker, but you maintained that interest in chemistry, obviously, and then it turns out by doing Ceramic Materials Workshop, by offering online ceramic chemistry, that's ended up being the sweet spot where people really need and want this information. So can you talk about kind of balancing the art interest with the chemistry interest in terms of how you're going to make a living as a as a human in the world?
Well, that was always the hard thing for the longest time. Yeah, it was definitely really, really weird to try to find a way to continue to be obsessed with materials. And, when I finished grad school, I had a fantastic time and I learned a lot about art. I learned what I wanted out of grad school. But yeah, again, you come to that place of that thing that doesn't leave your head, that sort of obsession, that itch that never gets scratched. And it just sort of never went away. So after grad school, Dr. Carty had asked me to come back to Alfred to work for him. And again, we were sort of up in the air. And one of the odd things is Boulder at the time had a 5-semester program. So you get out of school in January and like, you can't really apply for jobs and you can't really do anything. And Carty had a business idea he wanted to pursue. And he asked if we would come back and work with him on it. And so we did. And what ended up happening is when I was previous in Alfred, I had started teaching the glaze calc class. And when I came back, they asked me to teach it again. So then I'm sort of doing R&D for Carty again and teaching glaze calc. And sort of that was feeding the addiction, right? Because I'm sort of back at just the research and the teaching part of it. And, having a good time doing it. But at the same time, Rose had gone and started working in the tile industry. And she her job elevated to the point where she sort of rose to the top of her factory. She started as a glaze designer, ended up as a plant manager. And then when she did that, she eventually got approached by all these other tile companies that were asking her to move. So we got approached by a company in California and we got approached by a company in Oklahoma. And we're sort of like, no, I mean, we're happy here. It's fine. And we just had our first child. And, we're like, we owned our house in Alfred and we were perfectly happy. And then we got approached for a company in Southern Pennsylvania. And it was really close to both of our families. Not really close, but relatively close to both of our families. And when we're living in Alfred, go look up Alfred, New York on a map, everybody, because people hear New York and they're like, oh yeah, New York City. No. New York City was 6 hours away. We're half the distance to Toronto that we are to New York City. And we're like, oh, okay. So family, that's pretty attractive. And so we jumped at it and we took the job. And that's where CMW came from, was when we left Alfred. I was doing the dad thing, but Alfred had asked me to keep teaching my classes because they didn't have an expert on the subject. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I think I can do this online. And Ann Courier, who was the head of the department at the time, is like, this is weird, but I trust you. And we tried it and it was a big hit. And so I was like, oh, this is really, really cool. But then the real inspiration came that when we taught our first class that was sort of off term and open to the public, about half the people that took the class were not university students. They were like some woman in Washington State and some guy in Florida and this person in the UK. And all of a sudden we're like, oh, this is very interesting that there are a lot of people who weren't in academia who wanted to learn this stuff. And I will admit, I had the academia blinders on. I lived in academia. I basically had never left academia up to that point, and my consideration was sort of academia. But all of a sudden, there were all these people who were very interested in it. And so we had started teaching it online. After doing it for a while, the university as a whole had made it clear that they weren't particularly interested in these non-university students. And they're sort of making them jump through hoops that the students were complaining about. They're like, I just want to learn. I don't care about the university stuff. And the university's like, we don't care. So we're like, fine, okay, we'll go. And we launched CMW, and that was it. And it was a slow growing process. It was planting a lot of seeds to grow flowers in the future. But yeah, that's how we started doing it all online.
It's interesting the timing of all this because, like, if this had happened 20 years ago, teaching online would have theoretically been possible, but the video part of it, like in terms of you interacting with students, was just a lot more laborious. But now, like, it's easy. Like, you can talk to people. I mean, I know that you record videos that they watch, but you also interact. Like, you have a
Yeah,
class, it's a real class, which I think is that personal touch. It matters when you're learning something that can be confusing.
absolutely. And that's part of what we do is, we really see our teaching efforts as being communicators and translators, and to try to take something that does not make logical sense. And to be clear, anybody out here listening to this episode who's tried to look at glazes, they're like, I don't know, it doesn't make any sense. You're not wrong. You are not wrong. When you look at a glaze recipe and you try to make some logical jump as to that result that comes out of the kiln, there isn't one. There is not a logical connection that you will naturally come to, which is why people are confused and intimidated by glazes. The catch is you have to learn the chemistry. The chemistry is the Rosetta Stone. And anybody who says, oh, glaze chemistry doesn't apply to artists, or oh, it's different for us, or no, those people don't understand chemistry. You literally have not bothered to study all the subtlety. And it's a hard subject to get across. I was talking to a guy on social media yesterday who's like, I read all the books and I read the engineering books, and I still don't understand this basic concept. And I'm like, yeah, because it's not what they're talking about. It's a very specific subject. It's a very specific perspective, and it's a very specific translation that we have to do to make sense of it. And like, can you get by without understanding glaze chemistry? Sure, you can get by. Your life will be worse because of it. It's the same way of like, can you spend the whole rest of your life, eating takeout food? Absolutely. Will you eat some great food? For sure. But, it's a different way of approaching life. Like, it's just going to have its consequences. It's going to cost more, and you won't be able to change something. And sometimes you get a bad one. And, it just has all those different variables, right?
When you're designing a course for someone that may know a lot or may know very little, but they're in the same class, how do you do that? Like, how do you make a course that is accessible, challenging for the people that know more, but accessible for the people that know less?
You always have to start at the beginning. One of the hardest things that we've confronted as educators is we have a lot of people that will come to us and be like, I already know a lot. I read all the glaze book classes 30 years ago, and I went to a school and I took the glaze chemistry. I know a lot. We have an advanced class. I want to go straight to your advanced class. I don't want the beginning class. And when we first started CMW, we were open to that, and we're like, oh, okay, here you go. And oh boy, did every single one of them fall on their face. Because unfortunately, the other problem that we face in ceramics materials as a whole is that the conventional wisdom is terrible. Almost everything from a technical perspective that is taught in the ceramics community, and ceramics, I love you. Don't take this as an insult. Everything, every studio, every school, every workshop, anything that anyone has told you from a technical perspective is probably wrong. Okay. And I know it's the tried and trusted information. I know it's the gospel that's in this book that's been handed down for potters throughout the year. I know it's coming from trusted, loved resources, but it's kind of garbage, and it's kind of nonsense. And it's really exhausting because there is absolutely a perspective out there that does work. It makes it all make sense. It makes it all come together. But unfortunately, we have to abandon a lot of what people have been taught as far as ceramic materials, because honestly, most of it has been being taught by people who aren't experts in materials. They're potters, and I respect their experience. Obviously, they have gotten this far with their experience, but that doesn't mean they know anything about materials. And the way I always talk about it is, so as I mentioned, my father was a doctor. He's now retired. And, at one point years ago, we wanted to really study toxicity. And we wanted to start to understand these concerns with toxicity on the human body. So I went to my father and I said, you're not an authority on this. He was an OBGYN. And I said, which doctor should I talk to about toxicity? Should it be an internist, a GP? Is there a pathologist? Like, who's the doctor? And he laughed at me. And he's like, none of them. They're all morons as far as what you want to talk about. To assume that a doctor is going to have that particular experience is wrong. You need to talk to a toxicologist, who is a person who studies the effects of poisons and toxins on the human body. But he said, say you go to your GP, right, your general practitioner. Well, they can check your vitals and they can give you a diagnosis if you've got a cold. But say you go to your GP and say, I'm concerned about ceramic materials. I'm concerned about manganese. And the first thing that they're going to go is, okay, let me look into that. And what is that doctor going to do? Go to some great authority that they were taught in medical school 30 years ago, or some great experience and exposure they have to manganese? No, they're going to go to Dr. Google. And they're going to get the same garbage information that's just on the internet for anything. And the materials are the same, of that there's this huge trusted thing, but it's not those people's experience. And what we've tried to do is to just eliminate all of the myth, all of the rumor, and just get to the pure information. And great. I know that this special firing fixes that problem and this material's magic and all that. And my perspective is, okay, prove it to me. Prove it to me. Or I'm going to prove what is the reality of it. And that's sort of that dragon that we're always chasing.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of over 4,000 objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfieldcollection.com. I have a question just about your personality, because I've worked I've worked with you for a while now. You're very passionate about testing things to be right or wrong. How do you have certainty in some areas and be open-minded to new research in others?
Well, because you are never certain, right? I was talking I was in an online class last night with some students, and we were talking about some of these concepts. And I was saying here's what we know, and we still have to be open to the future. That is science. Okay. Science is always that the future has something new for us. Okay. And so when anyone is teaching science, they are teaching the science of now. And that's the most important thing. It's only science as good as it is at the moment. And we do have to come at that with authority, but the context is always the authority of now. And we always have to be open to more information, because, you're saying that there's a confidence. Oh, let's be clear. I have horrible imposter syndrome. And when I talked to my father about his professional career, he's like, oh no, I'm a fraud. Like, I have no confidence. And, he did medicine for 50 years. He's like, oh, when I retired, I thought I was as much of a fraud on the last day as it was on the first day, because you always have to ask that question. But there is a level of science where things move into reality, and understanding that transition between the reality and the theory becomes something that we're always working with the evidence that we have now. And understanding that science is not hard and fast. One of the things we always teach about is Stahl's map, which is this map that tells you what glazes will do. And Stahl's map is actually something that Carty and I really brought to the community because it sort of disappeared for almost 50 years. It was published, but sort of no one knew it was there. And Carty had rediscovered it, and we'd been evangelizing it for all these years. Well, when we first started bringing Stahl's map out, we get all these people that say, oh, but look, this is different. When I do this glaze, that's different. And that proves that Stahl doesn't work. And we're always like, no. What you're missing is Stahl is a model. And science is always based on a model. Here's what it's most likely is, but we have to look at this variable or that variable, and we have to be open to interpretation based on experience and based on the reality that we see in front of us. But that is being flexible and being open. And that's why I always say, like, I don't have all the answers. I have the knowledge and experience that I have right now, but that can change and that can grow, and you have to do that. But that's why that the sort of, the wise old myths of ceramics are so exhausting, because there's no evidence from them. There's no evolution. It's always, I got in an argument with someone once about durability of clay bodies. Right? And we were talking about what vitrification is, which is making clay bodies impervious to water. And this person really thought that they had this like aha moment where they were going to catch me. And they were like, well, what about all the pots that are coming out of Mexico that are made out of red clay and are under fired? And I was like, I'm not the one trying to justify the value of these under fired wares. I'm going to critique those too. So don't think that just because someone's doing something makes it the right answer, right? That there is good information, and then there's what people are going to do. And so you're always sort of dealing with those sort of discrepancies.
Yeah, and I think for students, oftentimes when they're asking questions, there's a dynamic with the teacher. Like, they come to you for the answer, but also if you give them an answer they don't understand, sometimes there can be tension. Or I should go back to my own experience. When I was in school, I wanted to understand so bad that when I didn't, I often would be like, oh, this teacher's not explaining it right. And that was just my own arrogance. But do you find that in students, or when a student doesn't understand something, how do you coax them into understanding? Because sometimes they might have emotions about not understanding.
The first thing is, I have serious opinions about concepts of failure and achievement in education. I have major problems in the way that academia, whether it's elementary school for the youth or for universities, the way that they judge people's ability to access information, the way that they judge people's abilities to think and conceive. And I'll admit, I already told you my story, being burned by people's expectations of what, what you should be achieving to go in a role. And for me, if your students aren't learning, you are a failure. And honestly, you should be ashamed of yourself as a teacher, because that is your job, is to teach. But the caveat to that is that we also need to embrace as students that the answers aren't easy. People come to us to learn about glazes and clay bodies, and we basically only teach in 3-month courses. We've got a few shorter things that are sort of snippets to get people to wet their feet, but it's really a 3-month course. And people are like, well, where's the short version? I want the 3-day workshop. I want the quick. And my answer is nope, doesn't exist, because all of that is part of a story, and you need to know the entire story to get there. So we need to engage. We need to start at the beginning. You're talking about sort of people with more experience or less experience. My thing is always, let's start fresh. Let's clear the board. Let's clear what we think we know, and let's do this. And as an educator, my real job is to translate, to get them to understand. And you've got to use every tool in your tool bag. Like one of the classic ones. So in our online classes, most of the content is a recorded lecture. And a lot of people are like, oh God, online, like a recorded lecture. Like, I don't want that. I want to see the teacher. I want to engage. Yeah. Well, let me tell you, I taught glaze calc for years at Alfred, and my class was always scheduled at 8 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. in the winter, and Alfred is cold and snowy, and I am teaching basically 20 to 30-year-olds. And let me tell you, 20 to 30-year-olds are not engaged to learn sitting in a cold lecture hall learning an academic subject at 8 in the morning. So I learned to put on a show, to put on a performance, to get it exciting, to get it engaging. But then when I turned to online education, it was profound to me how this changed the information flow. Because one of the worst things that goes on in academia, whether it's a pottery class or an English class, of you can only retain the information as fast as you can process what the teacher's saying to you. So if the teacher's lecturing at you, you better be taking notes, and your brain better be processing it at the same time, and you better not miss anything, and you better not be sick for a day, because you're gonna lose all of that. And then the educator's basic response is, great, deal with it. It's not my problem. But in an online recorded video, you pause, you replay, you rewind, you watch it again. You put it on a second time in the background while you're throwing. You spend the time to engage with the material on your terms. You know, one of the things when I first did this and I was at the university, and a lot of the people in the university was like, well, but what about the students like doing it at home in their dorm room in their PJs? I was like, great, because they're doing it. They're spending the time to engage with information because it's not easy. And I would rather give my students every opportunity to absorb and to engage and to take that. And then on top of it, you know, what we do is we have online discussions where then you can come and ask questions. We have message boards and you can ask them there. And so there's always an opportunity. And I think the traditional academic model is like, no, the teacher has to be there to answer the question right now. And I always say to our students, watch the entire lecture, because I've also written these lectures to have a narrative. And so usually that question that comes up, I already know that you're going to have that question, and I'm going to answer it 5 minutes later. So I say, write down your questions as you're watching the lecture, and then come back after you finished it. And if you still have the question, then ask it. Because yeah, it should be my job to get you to learn, and to get you to learn a subject that with Glaze Calc probably you don't want to learn. And like I said, it's not logical from an outsider's perspective.
Well, I wanted to wrap up talking about For Flux's Sake, which is the podcast that you do with Rose, your wife, and Kathy King. And when we put this whole thing together, one of the goals that you said, or one of the things, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but
Hey.
when we were talking about it before it all started, you said Rose is really smart, but she needs encouragement to say these things out loud. And I think that there is something to that. Like, her personality is less big than yours. And so if you look at the two of you, people are going to ask you questions, even if she's the one that might have not that you don't have the answer, but like on your website, you describe her as she's the brains of the operation.
Yeah.
So could you talk about, through this podcast, being able to be a part of a team when you're answering these questions, and sometimes leaning on her knowledge and sometimes leaning on yours?
Well, it comes down to the teaching aspect of it. I think was the hardest thing for her, because Rose was never a teacher. I went into teaching. I taught my first class at Alfred when I was 23 years old, and I had been in art and theater. Literally, you know, when I was in high school, I had to decide between the art or theater. Like, those were literally the two things I was interested in doing. And I'd been in a lot of plays and done a lot of acting and understood that sort of thing. And so I was very aware of the performance aspect of it. But Rose, she's funny because she is much smarter than I am. She's much funnier than I am. And of course, the hilarious thing, you know, the secret life into couples is when we're like not doing, you know, like I'm not talking to you or not recording the podcast or whatever, like she's the loud one and I'm the quiet one. Like, she's the one who's in charge. She's the one who knows how things are going to work. And I'm just along for the ride. Like, whether it's in the business, whether it's in answering something, whether it's in raising our children or any of those things, like I am an engaged parent, but like she is the one who takes charge. And yeah, so with her, it was purely a question of like, no, come on, show everybody how great you are. And you know, she's still embarrassed by it and loves everyone's attention. And for us, it's always just finding that balance of her being confident in her skills. And that's for everybody, man. Boy, I always say to our students, like, you all should be so impressed with how much you do and how much you know. And everybody, whether we're talking about glaze or just getting by in your regular life, like everybody in this world is so impressive that they're able to get by by day, and that they can get all the things that they get done. Because yeah, confidence is the hardest thing, and that's, tell Rose you love her, because she deserves to hear it.
Well, one aspect of the show, the part I enjoy the most is the premise of the show is you and Rose know a lot. Kathy also knows a lot, but Kathy is so fast comedically that when we talked about the concept, we were just like, okay, well, this is what I said to her. I want you to try to distract Matt. We're going to ask him these questions, but then let's distract him. Let's just see what happens. And that funny agitation between the three of you, and now Rose does it too. She probably does it off mic too.
All day.
So you'll be giving some answer, and I can just tell both of them are like, "Oh, I've got him. And then they're just like saying things just to distract you and make you laugh and make everyone laugh. But what it does, and the show is modeled off of Car Talk, which was, the famous NPR show. But what it does is it makes chemistry seem simple, because when you're laughing, it gets through the frustration barrier. And I see that when people write in with similar questions over and over again. I'm like, oh, right, these are concepts that, we need to have some levity. They have to be presented in a funny, accessible way. And I think that's really the value of the show.
It's gotta be fun. I'm laying all this sort of heavy information about how serious the chemistry is and how you have to go through it. That is absolutely true, man. But if you can't have fun with it, oh boy, again, talking about failing as a teacher. Like I said, my high school chemistry teacher, I had a horrible time with it, but man, was he fun. It was hard to learn, but boy, Moose Curtis, if you're listening, that's what goes by, Moose. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and he'd get serious when he needed to get serious. But I was taught something. I think it came up when I was in grad school, and we'd had this series of artist lectures. And they kept going on really long. We would bring in these visiting artists, and they would always take place at like 8 p.m, and they would go on. And at some point, somebody had said snidely to me, we're just in the audience, and they said, "The mind can only procure what the butt can endure." And I was like, oh my goodness. This is the problem. Like when people are just expected to sit there and digest it because it's good for you. And the answer is no. You gotta make that dish fun. You gotta make it worth eating. My favorite one is Brussels sprouts. It used to be Brussels sprouts are miserable. Everybody figured, oh yeah, put some bacon on there. Get some Maillard, get some browning on there. All of a sudden, that's really good. You boil those suckers. That's disgusting. But there's ways to make things good, and you should have fun with it. And that's why, we had talked about Car Talk when we came on. But, mine was a lot of my favorite shows. Mythbusters is huge for me. Love Mythbusters. Love Bill Nye, but I loved Beekman's World and Mr. Wizard. And my kids now love Mark Rober and all that kind of stuff. It has to be fun. These are intimidating subjects. I get it. Nobody got into ceramics because they wanted to learn glaze chemistry. Most people got into art because they wanted to make beautiful things and have fun doing it. And then the only reason why they learned glaze chemistry is because it made their art making more miserable because their glazes weren't working, or they couldn't get the surface that they want. And they realized, oh no, I have to learn this thing that I've been avoiding. And that's what's been the misery of glaze chemistry. And it's got to be fun, because otherwise it's just a bunch of recipes. It's just a bunch of weird chemical symbols that people throw at you. And you can't learn from that. It's that thing of no, you just stare at that book. You stare at that book and you keep staring at it until you learn. And my thing is always my impression of reading articles, God, the ceramic engineering articles are the worst. If you sit there and you read it for a page, and then you don't quite get it, but you're a smart person, so you go back and read it again, and then you think you get it, you don't really get it. And then you just move on and read the rest of the article, assuming that you're absorbing the information. But because the communication style is so bad, it is alienating and it's infuriating. And then nobody's any better for it. And like, I understand industrial standards and I understand needing, academic procedures and all that, but man, the gatekeeping in education, like I said, it's a problem. And we really try to overcome that. We try to make it fun. We try to make it silly. Like you said, of like when we were first putting the show together, I was like, okay, well, we need a third person. And my list was Kathy or nobody. I did not have a backup if Kathy said no, because I'm like, Kathy is the funniest person I know in ceramics. And like, there's some funny people in ceramics, but like Kathy, she is a world on her own. She is just an absolute firecracker. And it is the three of us all the way down. Like, yeah, I talk a lot, but like, yeah, we need all of us to make it work.
Can you plug how people can take the classes?
Absolutely. We are Ceramic Materials workshop on all the things. So you can find us at ceramicmaterialsworkshop.com and on Instagram and Facebook and all the places. So yeah, if you just go to our website, we offer all of our classes online, open to the public. We've got lots of different ways to get into the information, lots of different sort of levels of information. If you're intimidated and just want to start, we've got some simpler programs and all that. But yeah, you can find all that at ceramicmaterialsworkshop.com.
Well, thanks, man. Good to see you.
Thanks, Ben.
I'd like to thank Matt for coming on the show. It's been so much fun working with him on For Fleck's Sake over the years, so I appreciate him chatting and talking about his background on this episode. Before we go, I'd like to thank today's sponsors. That's Ceramics Monthly, which is offering you, the listener, 15% off any new CM subscriptions. Now through January the 31st, you can visit ceramicartsnetwork.org/Rambler and enter the promo code for the subscription of your choice. I'd also like to thank the Archie Bray Foundation, our mothership, for supporting the Brickyard Network, as well as the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor on the show, you can get in touch through the website. That's brickyardnetwork.org. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.